Kate Mila Falcher, welcome to Irish Granny Helen, and welcome back, Tim.
Thank
Tim is
you.
here to help me do this. Well, Tim's going to do it, and I'm just going to argue with him. The Spirits book by Allan Kardec, and we've done the first two chapters, and we're starting the third chapter. And we were just having a little discussion about it before I started to record, and I told him to wait. Let's record it so everybody can see us argue and fresh argument. So I think maybe it would be helpful to explain our frame of reference. So I'm coming from having been a science person, and you're coming from.
Well, I know it's going to be a shock, but I actually have a science background as far as classes in science and all that from college and high school and stuff like that. And then I've been in computer science 20, 30 years of my life.
Yeah, but computer
So,
science is not really science. Computer science is black magic,
well,
right?
of course it is. That's the second realm of my education. Hello.
I know. I always think of you as somebody who is, and this might be just my misapprehension, that you're somebody who is very grounded in um, philosophy, the theology, and metaphysics.
Yes, you wouldn't think it.
I do think
And
it though.
but for most people, their first reaction to me, that would not be the first thought.
You're the IT guy.
IT guy in sci-fi fantasy novels and stuff.
Yeah, I think we can rescue you. I think it'll be okay.
My first love is, truly mysteries and Agatha Christie, but
Oh, I don't think we've ever talked. Have we ever talked about
no.
that? I love Agatha Christie. She was my adult entree into mysteries, because before that I was into Nancy Drew, and then graduated to Agatha Christie, and I loved her. And she's why I learned French, because, and I don't speak French, but I studied French. I don't want anyone to think I can say bonjour, Hercule Poirot, all of those books had little phrases in French, and it would drive me crazy. I was about, I don't know, 12, 13, and I thought, I am going to learn French because I don't know what they're talking about here.
Right.
How how did you get into Agatha Christie?
I forget exactly when I was in high school, we almost always went on a Saturday to the used bookstore, and because I liked what I call gothic uh, horror novels and stuff.
Hmm.
One of the first ones that I remember reading is like The Spiral Staircase, and then always
Who
the
wrote
ones.
that?
I knew you were going to ask me that because I
Was
don't
that
remember.
H.P. Lovecraft? No,
No, it
no,
was a woman who is considered America's version of Agatha Christie.
not
I'd have to look it up. I can look it up real quick.
Mary Roberts Reinhardt.
Reinhardt?
Yeah, Mary Roberts
Yeah,
Reinhardt. Yeah, her.
yeah.
Oh, I loved her when I was a kid.
And
Isn't
that's
that
what got
funny?
me into
Loved her
there's
book.
always some type of romance, but there's always the haunted castle or
That was the
something like
good
that.
part.
That,
The haunted estate that she somehow got roped into being in. Yeah, yeah.
exactly.
It was a heroine.
And
And
then I started reading all the Miss Marple stuff.
yeah, yeah.
That's what got me to learning how to knit was because of Miss
Miss
Marple.
Marple. And those books fed my fascination with Egypt. The Mystery on the Nile, Death on the Nile, Death on the Nile. What's your favorite Agatha Christie book? I mean, that has nothing to do with Allan Kardec, by the way, but we have to talk about this. What's your favorite Agatha Christie story?
Ooh, that's going to be a hard one because I haven't
It's
read
been
them.
so long. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
But I mean, it was always the it, the one that out from the west, the the talking about the poem of the Lady of Shalott. I forget book, which Miss Marple book that was, but that's where I tied in because
I
she
don't remember.
does the phrases of the Lady of Shalott,
Yeah. Yeah.
and I memorized the whole poem because of that.
Oh my God. Nerd, meet nerd. Well, I know. I remember exactly my favorite because I would be reading them and I'd be kind of trying to figure out, solve the mystery. And I always was able to narrow it down to one or two, and I was usually, one of them was usually right, because there was a lot of red herrings, but she dropped a lot of hints, right? But the one that just floored me, and don't say anything if you remember the ending. I don't want to spoil it for anybody who hasn't read it. The Murder of Roger Ackroyd.
I know the title. I don't remember the book.
Well, we can't even really talk about it. I don't want to spoiler,
Right.
for anybody because I believe it's her best true mystery. I mean, she did a great job. Maybe because I was, I don't know, 11 and not very, you know, experienced of the world, and probably there are 25 million books like that, but it took me by surprise for sure. I loved it. It was great stuff.
See, in my second semester in college was like the research paper and stuff. The first research paper where they teach you to go to the library, stuff like that. Things that you even learned in high school, but then they made it better in college. Well, I did mine over Agatha Christie, and my teacher was from France,
Oh, great.
and she enjoyed Agatha Christie. We had good discussions on Agatha Christie and Tony Hillerman because she liked mysteries.
Tony Hillerman. Yeah, not big on Tony Hillerman. I never they never connected for me, you know. You know who I loved, and this is not really mystery. No, this is turning into book clubs. Um, Not really mystery, but kind of I wouldn't even say suspense, kind of a procedural, kind of like a crime procedural, but more nuanced than that, was Elmore Leonard. I cried when
Mhm.
he died. He didn't die very long ago, probably about 5, 10 years ago. He wrote all these books from the perspective of uh, kind of mid-level crime family mafioso type characters from Michigan and lowlifes from Florida, and they met, and his gift for dialogue is what got me. You could hear the regional accents, and the
Right.
repartee was just so clipped and so fast and great. um they've made a couple of movies from his books. They made Get Shorty.
Right.
It was a terrible movie. It did not do justice to the book at all. I was really disappointed. And they made one out something. I think it was maybe Jennifer Lopez and, oh, Clooney, maybe. It was about a woman FBI agent and a male criminal con artist, and they meet in a prison. And I won't go into details and spoil it for anybody, but it was a really clever book. But yeah, he died. He made his living when he first started out doing scripts in Hollywood. He wrote westerns. Not a big fan of westerns, but his westerns were really nuanced. Really, I mean, you would read one of his western books and it would never leave an arroyo. It was a standoff, and a
Right.
whole book was the give and take of the standoff. Really smart dialogue. He wrote the book and the script for 310 to Yuma.
Mm-hmm.
That's all I know. That's it. It was a great writer. So, thinking about this chapter, I think we can divide it into two arguments. We have the argument about his scientific stuff and the argument about what he says about the Bible. So, why don't we do the science stuff first so that then we can end on a friendly argument, a discussion instead of a brawl. Okay, let me look at my notes here. So why don't you start, because you appreciated what he had to say more than I did, and I don't want to be completely negative. So why don't you start?
Well, because the first section the chapter is called creation.
Creation.
So it's, the first section is the formation of the worlds. And um, the formation of the worlds, plural, not the world.
No, in my book, it's planets. But
Okay.
okay.
And that it's going to be a difference in our conversations because my book is a little like a different edition compared to Helen's.
And the thing is, it was written in was it written in French or Portuguese? I can never remember.
It was written in French originally.
French. Okay. And then so translations make a difference too, I think. Yeah.
And so the first question, starts out, the universe comprises the infinity of worlds, both of those we see and those we do not see. All animate and inanimate beings, all the stars that revolve in space, and all fluids with which space is filled. And so then the first question is, has the universe been created or has it existed from eternity like God? And their response is, the Spirit's response is, assuredly the universe cannot have made itself. And if it had existed from all eternity like God, it could not be the work of God. Reason tells us that the universe cannot have made itself, and that as it could not be the work of chance, it must be the work of God.
Did you ever see the Baltimore Catechism?
I have not.
This reminds me a lot of the Baltimore Catechism, because what he, and I think that maybe it's intentional. I don't know when that was first published, but it was a primer for children or young people becoming Catholic, or children who were Catholic, to get them well indoctrinated. And each chapter was a series of questions and answers, and essentially we memorized them. We had to memorize them, and we had to get them verbatim. It's so weird, but this kind of reminds me of that. And his explanations are coming from a very specific context, and I think that's what my problem was with it, now that I've had a little bit to think about it, because he's asking questions from the point of view of like a Christian in his time, right? If he were having a conversation with a Christian from his time and they were asking him questions and he was trying to explain through the spirits, right? So he's addressing a certain perspective on everything. And I don't have that perspective, so I wouldn't ask those questions. They seem skewed, or I don't know.
Seeing right off the bat, where are we going to have
good
a difference? Because here's the first thing that I would say. Remember that he taught science, languages. He taught in the school until he was basically chased out of the school because he didn't want the priest coming in and teaching catechism during his classes. And, they're saying that under the Napoleonic rule and all this, because this is like 1840s, because it was published 1845, 1850,
when he got fired.
Several of the books, but before that, And then that was when it was big on, and he was in a society of scientists, and he was approached by several scientists who were investigating the table knockings and, the
Mediumship. Yeah.
seances and stuff like
Yeah.
that, and he first just chalked it up to, you know, hoodoo voodoo type stuff, that there's no science to it. Then he started reading all this stuff that was coming to him from these other scientists, and then he started applying, at that time, scientific reasoning, and then that's what led him to these writings.
Do you
And I
know?
mention all that because of the science part.
Can I ask you?
'Cause
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but can
Mhm.
I ask you? Do you know how much he knew about ancient philosophy? I mean, had he immersed himself in that previously, or was he purely looking at it from a material scientific point of view?
Personally, I don't know. As far as I know, I wasn't there at the time, but
Maybe you were.
I could be a
You
past
could have
life,
been.
but, you know, um, but I'm gonna take it that he was taught at least the primers of the philosophies and stuff, since that's what he also taught in school.
You would
So he
think.
would have introduction, to all that, because not only was it language, but it was science, it was mathematics, it was history that he tutored people in. Because when he left the school, that's how he was trying to make a living, was through uh, tutoring people, tutoring students on the side.
Yeah. So he was starting out answering questions for people who were completely newcomers to this kind of philosophy, right?
Right.
And I just I have trouble with the question, who made the universe? I just think that we need to be beyond that, and I don't mean having studied more. I just mean that's not the right question. I don't think it's the right question, but that's just me. Later on, he gets into more, meat and potatoes stuff. But this stuff, these questions here in this chapter seem, ah, I have a word for it. Elementary. Is that unfair?
No, but see, I would counter that a little.
Okay.
And the counter would be the formation of the worlds, not the world. So
Oh,
it's
okay.
not coming from the centrist view of everything revolves around Earth.
Right.
They'd
You're right.
already,
Yeah.
astronomy and all that, but it's truly, there's many worlds. There's many lives on other worlds. There's, you know, and we haven't even touched on it yet, but it's like there's comet and there's dust and there's liquids that's in other planets, and that life is different than what we think it is. And that how dare we think God only made everything for us looking out.
See, I think of these questions in terms of uh, the Hermetic principles, and they kind of address the same questions, but their perspective is different. It's just different. And I think he's addressing a particular audience. And I find it frustrating. I want to get on with, something a little bit more um, involved. And he doesn't have the luxury of particle physics. He doesn't have the luxury of plasma physics, quantum physics, which I think we're really lucky these days to have. Uh, what little I know about it, it resonates with a lot of these ancient philosophies, and it sort of jumps over a lot of these questions that are being asked because they're already being addressed by quantum physics and particle physics, um, plasma physics.
But
But I
see,
go ahead.
is that a difference that when this was written in let's say
Yeah,
1845,
yeah.
okay, what did the average person on the street, how much did they know? How much learning did they have?
Probably nothing about any of this.
Compared
Yeah.
to what we knew just from from kindergarten up to 12th grade
Yeah. Our most
would be
rudimentary
would
would be
be
more.
seen, overwhelming compared
Yeah.
to back
Yeah.
then because let's face it, Laura Ingalls Wilder and them were fighting Indians and writing on slates their
Well,
ABCs and 1, 2, 3s in 1840.
and didn't her sister go blind because she had the measles?
Yes.
Well, I think that's what happened to her. I mean, it's been
I was gonna say rheumatic
scarlet
fever,
fever,
but
rubella.
scarlet fever.
That's German
Yes.
measles, but it's been a number of decades since I read those books. So
But I used her as an example
it's a
because
good
that was
example.
about
Yeah,
the time,
yeah.
you know, so
Listen, by 1900, people were. You can watch snaps like little shorts, movies from the turn of the last century that people filmed on the earliest cameras. They have no sound, they sitting in one place filming a street scene, and you can see what life was like then. People were in horses and carriages, and women's skirts were on the ground, and on a work day it was all men downtown, all men, and I think that the world has changed so quickly. Their context is different. No judgment. I'm not saying that
right.
they're any less for it, but it's a little frustrating because, okay, I understand why they're asking the questions the way they're asking it, but I'm eager to get beyond that because I don't think that those answers are going to serve us all that much. They provide a foundation if you're starting at ground zero, but
Right.
you and I, we're ready to maybe take the training wheels off.
Right. But I
Yeah.
and seeing but this is where I'm finding it interesting. Because if I'm one of those that already believes life is out there, if the UFO came down and landed tomorrow, I'd run out and please take us away from all this current um, Sesame Street going on.
I don't
Okay,
care if it's standing room only. Take me with you. Well,
and
that's the interesting thing that he brings up is that in the context of planets, that one of the next questions is there life out there? Well, okay, go ahead. Sorry.
well, no, because the next question, we're under the formation of the worlds. It's like, well, how did God create the universe? To borrow a well-known expression, by His will. God said, "Let there be light." There was light. And in my mind, that's the Big Bang. Church wouldn't up until, what, the 1990s, they didn't word it that way. But one of my first RCIA teachers, he said, "Let's be real, the Big Bang is science." And when he said, "Let there be light," that was the Big Bang. It wasn't.
Enlightenment. Yeah.
Yeah.
And see, I think of it more in terms of the ancient Greek, like maybe Plato, excuse me, philosophy that believes there's a continuous ebb and flow of energy coming from the source. Call it, I don't know, even the sun, that we don't know, right? And sending out its emissaries to bring back information. It's an ebb and a flow. And that's very rudimentary. But uh, I don't think of God said, "Let there be light." In fact, I even wrote in the margin up here. We need to clarify our terminology, and I don't even remember the first two chapters. I know he talked about God. Uh, do we need to even believe there is a God, because that already is anthropomorphizing the source? Yeah, see, it gets sticky, huh?
See, yes, there has to be God. Now, whatever you call God,
Well, does he define God?
you
That's
know,
it.
but
Yeah.
yes, there is God. It's an all important. It's the it's the the great all,
The
the
origin, the
great,
source. Right.
But
Right.
from what I have been taught about spiritism and the Allan Kardec stuff through more from the medium's book than the spirits book, um, our ancestors were raised Christian for the most part. Until you get back further in time, then they may be Celtic, they may be Egyptian, they whatever. But a lot of people were taught the Christian way. So they resonate with terms like God and
Yeah.
the prayers of our Father and Hail
Yeah.
Mary and stuff like that.
So you're saying he's choosing terminology that best reaches his audience, the
Yes.
questioners. I would agree with that. Somehow I wrote down here, what is he talking about? I was getting pretty snarky about the whole thing at one point because he was tying himself up into knots trying to explain uh, particles in the dirt, and then they burst into life, and I'm like, oh god, I can't. I understand, where he's coming from, but this is making me crazy because I want to get into something a little bit more esoteric. I don't care where material life came from. I'm more interested in beyond the material. I think that's the problem.
Okay, but seeing and that's all well and good. It's not a right or wrong thing.
Right,
But I'm
right.
looking the question when you're saying that, what I look down and start reading is it possible for a completely formed world to disappear and for that matter of which it is composed to be again disseminated in space? Yes, God renews worlds as he renews living beings that inhabit them. So there is that whole everything in its time, or everything has its season.
Go on, continue. I want to tell you a story.
Well, because I see it in your face, you have a comment,
Well,
so
I just don't think that that's a complete enough answer. And here's why. Hear me out. There are things like jumps in time. There are things like portals and other dimensions. Now, are my terms clear? Do I understand what I'm talking about? No. This is the best that I can do, right? But in the context of this conversation, let me tell you a video somebody just sent me. On Wednesday nights, I'm a guest on Deborah's Cosmic Fold um, channel. She does a little presentation, a pretty fabulous presentation every Wednesday night. And Denise and I and people call in, and and she always hits on something esoteric and paranormal and weird. So she just sent me a video. It was only about 8 or 9 minutes long. And we'll just stipulate the guy seemed sincere. It didn't feel or look or sound like a hoax. And it was just this ordinary guy, and he was befuddled. And so he said, I somebody tell me, am I losing my mind? I think that was even the title of the video. He said, I've lived here forever, and for decades and decades. My family, first when I was a kid with my parents, and now as an adult with my wife, and my children are grown. And this seemed rural, some kind of rural. He had an accent, I couldn't quite place it. Every week or so, we go out to this little local restaurant, and I like the fish. I like how they cook the fish, and I've known the owner for decades. I knew her family. I know where she lived. She was always keeping me up to date and tells me her son's going to build a house on the property. And so they have a familiarity with each other. They know each other's history. They're familiar with what they look like and talk. And so he had just talked to her the last time he went into the restaurant, which was within the last month or so, right?
Right.
So he and his wife go out to eat a night not too long ago, and they get to the restaurant and there's a crowd. Everything looks the same. They go into the restaurant and there's a completely different staff. And he said, I have to tell you this just to describe how different it was, but it was being run and managed, and the servers, everybody was an African American family. And he goes, well, where's, I can't remember his friend's name. I think her name, we'll call her Mary. The server comes up, this young guy, and can I help you? And he says, where's Mary? Is she off tonight? And the guy says, I don't know. And he says, but I don't know anybody by the name of Mary. And he says, but she owns this restaurant. And the guy looks at him and he says, no, my parents have owned this restaurant for 17 years. And we've been here for 17 years. And one of the cook came out, and the cook was not the cook he was used to seeing. And she said, oh, hi, it's nice to see you again. And he and his wife, same, she's experiencing the same confusion. So he's
Right.
got a witness, right? He's not just losing his mind. He's got a witness. And they look at each other. He said he thought his wife was going to pass out. And they just looked at each other like, what the hell is happening? And so they were polite, and the food was good and everything was fine. The service was great. And he said, he went out to the parking lot and he started making this video. And he was just shocked, And he says, I don't know what to say. I don't know how to explain this. Somebody please explain to me what just happened. The two of us had this experience. Someplace we've been going to for decades and decades, and they informed me they've owned it for 17 years. Okay, so there's a lot of weird things that happen in the world. I don't think he's done a follow-up yet. I don't know what the explanation could be, except maybe an alternate timeline, or
I have 4 letters for that would
okay,
explain everything.
okay.
CERN, CERN.
Isn't that a government agency?
Well, it's a project over in Europe. It's basically like a super collider. And
A
they
super
keep
what?
a super collider where they
I knew
get
it would sound they pound on atoms.
where they split the atom and all that in a big tunnel, and it is supposedly creating different timelines, which then are
Well, it
causing the
worked.
Mandela effect.
Isn't that the weirdest thing? And it wasn't just one person experiencing it. If one person experienced it, I would say, okay, he's having a moment. But his wife, she looked like she might go into shock. The
Right.
two of them were just befuddled. And it seemed sincere. It didn't seem like it was a bid for attention. It didn't seem like they're psychotic and they're delusional, and it's very weird. So I would use that all of this is about using this as an example that whatever the question was that we were first talking about that the book asked next seems almost too basic, because there is so much weird stuff going on.
Right.
Yeah.
And see, and I'm using the basis of conversations that I had with my godfather at the time about Allan Kardec stuff, because one of our conversations was demons and portals and stuff like that. What we call demons may be aliens in another realm. They're coming through and don't necessarily realize they're causing harm because
Right.
they're on a different wavelength or a different, totally different existence
Right.
from your favorite term, the meat sack world.
Very funny. Well, as we know today, as we see every single all the time today, there are plenty of bad, awful, nasty, evil, demonic, whatever you want to call them, whatever term you want to use, you know who you're talking about. Those people die. Their souls don't just miraculously become perfect overnight. You know, they're
No,
still wandering around looking for trouble to cause. And so I don't think the term demon to me implies angel and devil. You know, they're diametric opposites, the good and the bad, and they're these entities that are out there looking to cause damage. I don't think it's quite that esoteric. I think there's just malicious spirits who they were alive and now they're dead and they're kind of stuck in the bardo, wandering around, causing trouble for everybody. Um, Sometimes it's malicious and sometimes it's a little bit of sadistic pleasure and sometimes they're just impish, you know, like
exactly.
childlike. Yeah. So I don't know.
But I mean, you have the fairy rings, and that if you stay inside of a fairy ring, you're going to be transported and things like that.
Well, my grandmother used to tell us, don't be looking at yourself in that mirror all the time. One of these days, you're going to see the devil looking back at you.
Do you
I
know?
was terrified to look at myself.
Well, and see, and that's a very true thing that is taught from spiritism. And I keep saying spiritism because we use it in what's called a mesa blanca or a white tape. And it's basically having a seance. Okay. When you do, and if you think about it, when people died up and through I'm going to say the 50s, when someone died in the house, what was one of the first things that they did? They covered up the mirrors.
No, yeah, I think it depends on what culture. I know that in Jewish culture, they cover the mirrors. That's
But
right.
in the South, they would do that, you
Oh,
know.
I didn't know that.
Right.
That's interesting. Yeah.
And so, but when we would have seances, they you covered up all the mirrors in the house.
Why? Are
You
you
weren't
afraid something's going to come into the room or are you afraid one of you is going to go out through the mirror? What do you,
well, something could come in
from where?
from another dimension, not necessarily, from hell. We're not saying it's like,
No, no, I hear
666
you.
portal from
Yeah.
hell, but
Yeah.
it's a doorway to another existence.
Do they really need it? I mean, I feel like they don't really need it. I feel like if they're going to come, they're going to come.
Well, I come from the way that it was explained to me, and
That's, oh, no, 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 no.
you
I'm
know,
not
so
criticizing that. I don't want you to feel like I'm making fun of it.
no,
I'm
no,
just saying, I think it's
I
more
don't
simple.
have specific answers to everything, but at the same time, I have seen people that are taken over by Orisha. I have seen people taken over by other spirits. In the mediumship term, those people are called a horse because basically their spirit steps aside and someone else steps in and starts
That's
talking and
called a walk-in, right?
yes.
Yeah.
And when that's going on, you don't want one of the other things is you don't want the dead person to see the reflection of the person's body that they're in because they're going to freak because they know that it's not them.
Oh, I had never thought of that.
Okay.
Oh,
And
yeah.
because I had my godfather is one, and his lady, her name is Maria Lucinda. She comes from the 1400s. She comes from
Whoa, 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 wait. I thought you were talking about his girlfriend. Wait a minute. Back up.
no, his spirit guide who steps in. But when she
Oh.
steps in and takes over sometimes, she's moving around to tell you to open the door, to cleanse the door, stuff like this. Well, she's so used to walking through walls and stuff that the whole he would walk his body, he would try to walk through the door, and, you know, she's thinking she's on the other side and not the body, and he would literally run into a
Bang
wall,
into the door
run
or the wall.
into a
Yeah.
door, and then it's
Yeah.
like, but she was, um, Andorra. She was from the country of Andorra, which is
Oh, and
on
Andorra.
yeah, on the
Okay.
between Spain and
Spain and
France,
France. Right. Right.
you know,
So it's like San Marino. It's one of those little tiny mountainous countries
and
that.
they speak Catalan, which
Yes.
my English or my Spanish teacher in high school, that's what she taught us was Castellan Spanish. So very interesting that I had all these lead ups to this without,
Isn't Yeah,
you
you
know,
have to wonder. It begs the question, the karmic connections, right? It really does.
yeah,
And here's another thought. And the book does. We are kind of including the book here because one of the questions that's asked next is about life elsewhere outside of Earth, and his answer is a little bit snarky. It's like, well, surely you don't think that that a supreme being, God, wouldn't be able to create something different. I mean, how arrogant can you be, human?
exactly.
Yeah. But here's a thought. You read about people's experiences who've been visited, by UFOs, and some of them are taken and come back. They're kidnapped, I guess is the right word, and then brought back. And oftentimes they are able to levitate and move through walls and in their physical body, actually. But I'm thinking there must be some technology involved. I'm asking you, what do you think? Because was it your godfather, stepfather?
Hmm.
Yeah, couldn't actually go dematerialize.
No, but if you think of it in the NDE reports, people are always saying that they had the sensation of drifting up and they would see themselves, they could look down over the operating table or look over the accident side. And then
Yeah.
as they're going towards light until they're told it's not your time and sent back, they're they're moving through ceilings, because I remember this one NDE story where this person has died and they're floating up through the operating room and through the hospital, and they had made a comment that there was these tennis shoes tied around one of those, electric lines coming from the roof of the hospital.
And they
So
couldn't be
it's not you
seen.
couldn't be
Yeah.
it would not have been seen from the street, and they had sent someone onto the roof to check it. And then it's like, okay, well,
How'd they know that? Yeah, it's great
exactly.
stuff. Yeah, I
You
love
you
that
know,
stuff. The story of the woman who had the near death experience and found herself in the car with her sister who was rushing to the hospital because her sister was dying in the hospital, right? And she was able to tell, the woman having the experience was able to tell the sister rushing to the hospital after the event everything that went on in the car, and she thought she was alone in the car. It's pretty good stuff.
mhm,
So I see this proves my argument, Tim. You and I are already, like, I think we could stipulate about a lot of the ideas here in this chapter, and then the next section is about the Bible and Adam and Eve. Who was the
right.
first being and all that stuff. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Yes, because and you're talking like starting with question 50. Did the human race begin with only one man? And it says, no, he whom you call Adam was neither the first nor the only man who peopled the earth. And this is where I enjoyed this section
Yeah,
because they also talked about there were other people and other types of people,
yeah.
not just what y'all expect each other to look like that now. And that basically, the way that I'm interpreting, there are other civilizations before ours going back basically
Oh,
4,000
it says
years
it, yeah.
to the time of Egypt, you
Oh,
know,
and
it's
farther, much farther than that.
right,
What did he
but they're
say?
saying from the time of the flood, what you call the flood is not really exactly how it happened. That was just like an earth event, but
That was one of a series of cataclysms. Now we're in Paul Wallace territory. Now we're talking about, paleo contact. Well, not quite paleo contact, but paleo existence way well beyond. And the thing is, every time you read about the latest agreements in anthropology and paleontology, all that stuff, geology, they're always pushing the dates farther and farther back. Have you noticed that? The earth keeps getting older and older. It's so interesting.
and do you know who's having the trouble more than anybody on that? The archaeologists.
Well, listen, you are a scientist and you've established a long career in archaeology. You've gotten funding to do research, you've written papers, you've created a reputation, a professional reputation. You've given lectures, you have tenure, and you're putting forth all this stuff like it's the word of God. And now somebody is telling you, well, you're probably wrong. You're not going to want to go along with the new findings, which is sad because any kind of science, anything empirical like that, you're supposed to be willing to move with facts. When the data give you new information, you go with the new data. And sometimes people have a lot invested in the information that we have right now. It's too bad.
Because Egyptologists think they know everything about Egypt, and it's like,
Oh
you
my
didn't
gosh.
live during that time. I'm sorry, but some of the dating of objects now through our technology and through DNA, they can place this in whole different dynasties.
Yeah, time
Let's
period. Yeah.
let's take the Great Pyramid. It was not necessarily built by Khufu,
No, and
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 it's
and the
not.
Sphinx was there long before they have been telling us that it was there. I'll tell you a little story I read. I can't remember the source of this information. Um, but this is what I read. I'm not making it up. Is it true? I can't remember where I read it. But there's this guy in a boat, a canoe, whatever, who went up the Mississippi, and you can go up through the rivers that feed into it. You can go up and go off out of the center of the Mississippi. You can go into these other rivers. I don't know if it was the Snake River or he ended up in the Colorado River. I can't remember. But he ended up like in a sort of Grand Canyonish type of place where the walls were high and there was no access from the top because it was really, really high up and narrow, moving through the water. And they came around a corner, and here are um, Ogham writing from Ireland on these rocks high above. You couldn't reach it from the water, you couldn't reach it from the top of the canyon. Ogham writing is that weird, I think of it as stick writing from Ireland. So it's ancient, and it's like you'll see, let me see here, you'll see a straight line, and then there'll be a series of things sticking out of it from angles, and depending on how many, what direction, their relationship to each other, it's a language and there's
Right.
messaging going on. What's that all about? I mean,
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned that because there was an article the other day that I read in the newspaper saying that there was recent Nordic runes found up. Yeah, that's
how did
that's
you know? That was in my paper this morning. Canadian forest lies a mystery carved in stone. I'm going to do a video about it. Don't tell anybody.
I won't.
Okay.
Secret's safe with me.
But you're right. This is exactly. Isn't that weird? So did you read the whole thing? I didn't read the whole thing yet. I haven't had time, but I tore it out of the paper because I'm going to get to it, you know.
The one that your article looks bigger than the one that I read.
Well, this is the New York Times. So here's my big question. How old's that stone, and is it possible that somebody did it last week?
No.
Okay.
Because they have proven that it's older than that.
Okay. How do you date stone, though? It's pretty hard.
The stone itself cannot be dated, but if there's stuff around it or stuff in the groove
In the grooves, they're able to
you could
microscopically.
probably take that and like wood chips and stuff, date it and see if if it's in the last 100 years or is it 800 years.
Were you able? Oh, it's the Lord's Prayer.
Yes.
Oh, so it's not like UFOs.
No, it was not. It was not. Alien 103 has been here and used the bathroom, and it was terrible.
Greetings from the Pleiades. But still, isn't that interesting? Because they had no idea that there were people that long ago who were Swedish, because it was apparently it lined up with the Swedish version of the Lord's Prayer, and it was in runes. I mean, who writes in runes?
Early Middle Ages.
So, but here's the question: what part of Canada? See, I haven't read this, so I'm not prepared. Because if it's in certain parts of Canada, isn't that the New World?
It is the New World.
What are Swedes doing carving stones?
But what you're calling Swedes, remember, back pre-Middle Age, were Vikings.
The Norsemen. Viking actually is it's a description. It's not a kind of person. It means like pirate,
Right, but there were so many makeups of Vikings because they raided villages and seacoasts.
Yeah.
That you had Roman and British and what would be now Norwegian and
I have Viking blood. One of my daughters had her DNA done, and I told her, I'm going to tell you how this DNA is going to come back, the results. I was right on because I know my background. And unless there was a war or a displacement of populations, or which was very common in Ireland, was the marauding along the coast of the Norsemen, right? I told her, I guarantee you're going to, half your DNA is going to be from me. You're going to see almost all Irish, Celtic Irish, and you're going to see some Norse. You're going to see some Viking, because it's an inevitability.
Right.
You're not going to see anything else. And my husband, his background is English and German. And I told her, you're probably going to see a little English and a little German. So she gets her results back, and it's almost entirely Irish. So he actually has more Irish than he realized. A little bit of German, a little bit of English, Norse. That was it. And interestingly enough, most of the Irish came from the same place. They can tell, I guess. They can locate what part of Ireland, like down to like a small geographical area. And I had to laugh. I told her, my
Hold on one sec.
Okay,
one sec.
Go ahead. You gonna go play the piano? Ooh, you're transporting through dimensions there. That's so cool. Did you hear what I said?
Hmm. You
When
what?
you move, you go in and out because of the
Yes, because of my
background. Looks
background.
like you're going through dimensions or something. Um, I told her that you're going to find that most of the Irish is going to be from the same place. I didn't realize how well they could locate it. My grandparents grew up next door to each other. How boring is that? The point being that there was a lot of marauding coastlines, and they now think that there was much more Norse interaction with the indigenous people of North America than we
Hmm.
knew before. And Newfoundland, was settled. There were old long-term settlements in Newfoundland. They finally left, and they think I heard a discussion about this a couple months ago. They think that there was some sort of they encountered traders. It was either from Europe or indigenous people, but there was a disease, and people started dying off, and they had to leave over time because they just ran out of genetic, you know.
Right.
Yeah, and they had to go back. They left. Weird, huh?
It
So
is.
anyway, we've established that Adam and Eve were not the first people. They were the particular individuals that were mentioned at the beginning of another iteration of humans messing things up. Um, I have a very important question. If Adam was the first man and Eve was the first woman, who did Cain marry?
Well, out of the Bible, it had to be one of his sisters.
Well, actually, no, because in the Old Testament, well, he didn't have sisters, and in the Old Testament, they talk about people who lived elsewhere. Cain killed his brother and then went to live elsewhere with the other people in the other area. Wait a minute, I thought Adam and Eve were the. It's very contradictory, and that's where you get into Paul Wallace's stuff, which is so interesting. So the book here sort of concludes. I mean, it definitely concludes that it's all an allegory.
Yes, because they talked about the Mosaic record and things like that. That you're pulling the information as if what came from the Bible is the only source, and that's not even a tip of what you will find until you start opening your mind and reaching further back.
Right,
Once
reaching
you can
further
break
back
away
and
from that
across.
chain that says you're only good from this point to this point, and there's much more that is true and that is real that you don't have an inkling of because you've only been forced to know this much.
Yeah, you're sort of spiritually coerced into following a certain path and putting blinders on to other sources. And what's given to you has been selected, it's been edited. And rather than resist being informed about that, it's helpful to just be open-minded. If you're a true believer, your faith is not going to be shaken by hearing what other people have written or believe. It shouldn't be, would you think?
Yeah, no, it wouldn't.
So don't be afraid.
And because some of the stories that I've told you, firsthand knowledge that I have experienced that is of outside the bounds of anything that would be taught by church and
Mm-hmm.
taught by science
Mm-hmm.
and anything to that. And it's like I've experienced this from the time I was little. Like this morning, I woke up because I heard someone knocking. So I thought my brother needed something or somebody was needing something. And there was nobody at my door, at my bedroom door. My brother was in the kitchen and my sister-in-law was getting ready to go to her church. I said, "Did you knock on my door?" "No, I closed your door because we were gonna be letting the dog in." And it's like, "Okay, why did you ask?" Because somebody knocked, and it woke me up. And it was one of those
A
the
real
knock
insistent knock. Yeah.
right, which is the same as I'll wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning because someone's calling my name. When they're calling my name at 3 a.m., that means there's a message coming.
Right. Right.
You know,
Well, you know
and
who had that experience quite a bit is Whitley Strieber. Whitley Strieber, the writer who
right,
wrote Communion.
right,
His book was the first time you ever saw the gray alien.
right,
His description. When his wife died, they had made an arrangement. They've been practicing some kind of intense beyond meditation for a long time. And when she died, they had agreed that they would continue to communicate and he'd be woken up. And in fact, it started out after she died. Friends kept calling him and saying, I dreamt about Anne last night and she told me to tell you XYZ. And then eventually it became an immediate, one-on-one communication. Um, I don't have any problem believing that.
right.
Energy doesn't die. That's science. Energy sticks around. And that's what we pick up on, right?
Right, but one person's science is another person's metaphysics, which,
Yep.
it
I've always said metaphysics, plasma physics, quantum physics, and they're just slowly inching to the middle and becoming the same thing. The Hermetic principles are very much like somebody who's never learned physics trying to explain quantum physics. And all these advanced experimental physicists are beginning to say things like, well, maybe the ancients were right to begin with. Fascinating, right? I don't have the answers, but I love the questions.
well, and that's, my introduction philosophy class, which I took 2.5 years ago now, and that was after a dream of several times within a week of, "You need to be studying philosophy. You need to
Oh,
be studying
God.
philosophy." And it's like, where is this coming from? You know? And then
Yeah.
I opened up the web page for the local community college. I had 2 days that I could sign up for it, did it, and I was off and running. And in the first chapter, you have before Plato and all that, you had this, um, guy that was out studying comets coming around at a certain time each year, and he was watching the stars to prove it. And then that got him not only did he visually see it, record it, and all that, then he started recording some other stuff, and that was the start of the philosophy.
Who was that?
I knew you were gonna ask me that. I
It
will have
wasn't
to look it up and tell you.
Pythagoras or somebody like that.
No, it was before him.
We had to learn that in college, and I hated philosophy. I just thought these people. I hate to use the expression because it's awful, flogging a dead horse. I hate that. But that's what I felt like they were engaging in kind of a mental exercise for which there was no definitive answer. And it drove me crazy because, okay, this is what they thought. This is what they thought. We're never going to know for sure, at least not today, who was on the right track. And you want me to write an essay about it? It used to just drive me crazy.
But some of the same questions that we face today are the same questions that they brought up 1200 BC.
It just took me a little
And
longer to get there, Tim.
oh, I know. I mean, I was 54, 55 when I took my first philosophy class.
Yeah,
You
see, it's
know,
remarkable when you're ready, you're ready. And you can't force it. It's like trying to force feed somebody. It just takes
and
away
the
the pleasure.
philosophers talking about, you get this animation from source, spirit. It brings information to you from God, or how, and these are people we're talking that are Greek, who believe in the gods, and they're saying, yet the spirit sends the information that you need across to you so that you can do what you need to.
We get these concepts, philosophical theories, ideas, and why I was complaining earlier is when I read something that resonates for me, it makes sense. When I read something and it feels like they are tying themselves into pretzels, trying to come up with an idea, it starts to irritate me. You're making this too hard. Not that any of it is easy, but you're overly complicating something. There's a thread through this that is a basic idea, and people tend to complicate it. And I don't know, I prefer the things like stoicism. I read about stoicism recently. I really knew nothing about it. I know I learned about it before, but it went over my head because I wasn't interested. And now it made sense. I understood. And then we've been reading about Buddhism, and it is Stoicism of the East. I mean, it's
Right.
the
But
same.
this is the stuff that needs to be taught in elementary school.
Are you kidding me? No, I know you're not. I mean, I'm being facetious. It's ridiculous. They're not going to ever do that.
No, because it forces critical thinking
Yes,
before they can have control over it.
that's right.
Because I'm sorry, but the people that are in my philosophy and my sociology class that are like 19 years old, they have no clue. And
I
that's not
understand.
being fair or unfair to them. I'm watching the responses coming in discussion questions, and it's like, you know, how did we get here? Because I can remember in 1984 and 85 when they were showing me in civics class a film about how basically the Soviet Union can come over and will win without ever firing a shot because they're going to take over the schools, they're going to take over the towns and change things
Instead
within
of physically blowing things up, they're going to manipulate how people think or
and change
don't
and
think.
become like the town leaders and stuff like that
Mm-hmm.
and change the rules.
Mm-hmm. And guess what? You were right. You were right, because there is not a lot of critical thinking. And it's not about who's smart and who isn't smart. It's not about being better or worse. It's about being given the opportunity to use your brain, which we all have to one extent or another, right? We all have strengths and weaknesses. But every single kid in that kindergarten class can do what we were forced to do. There's a lot of judgment about Catholic schools, and I'm at the head of the line when it comes to judging. But in their defense, we were studying philosophy and we didn't know it. They would talk about, what does it mean to be infinite? What does it mean to be finite? And we were in the first grade. But I remember sitting at a desk and going, whoa, blow my mind. But they made us think. Yes, they
Mhm.
gave us a lot of dogma. We had to learn the doctrine. We had to study the rules. But at the same time, it made you think. And they didn't hold back on that. They didn't um, edit anything to prevent us thinking for ourselves. I got to give them credit for that.
Yeah, because I worked at a diocese as a IT support person, and we had students coming in every day working in different departments, and usually they would move between departments, except for IT. Um, and you hear these 10th and 11th graders talking, and it's like they s- they're talking as some of the adults that are 40 years old. You and they're 10th and 11th grade.
So where does that come from?
And one of the examples that I'm going to use, I because I was taking my RCI class or course with a priest there at the diocese, and we would have conversations. And this person had come up to me and said, "I hear you're wanting to join the church and all that." And I said, "Yes." And we were having conversation. And I said, "So, do you are you so you consider yourself a Christian?" And she looks straight at me and says, "No, I'm Catholic. I'm not Christian." And so I
Okay.
go back to my priest and I say that, and he laughs because that's when he explained the Cradle Catholic to me. The Cradle Catholics are taught one way, and that's all they know from the time that they're born to the time that they die.
Well, I was born into a Catholic family. I know that Catholics started the Christian faith, right? I mean, that's why it's called the Roman Catholic Church. And I know that fundamentalists like to argue that Catholics are not Christian because they don't follow that fundamentalist viewpoint. And they I guess want to align themselves with the fresh new followers of Christ who were sort of partly pagan, partly Jewish. I don't know. I'm not clear what it is they're trying to get at, because the early Christian church was begun by Roman Christians who called their group the Catholic Church, meaning universal. Before that, there were no Christians. Am I right? I mean, I think
Mhm.
that's right. Uh,
But typically, evangelicals, and I'm coming from the Baptist because that's how I grew up. Catholics aren't real Christians because they
yeah,
believe
I've
in
heard
Mary and
friends
all
of
that.
mine who,
And it's
yeah,
like that's not exactly true. Oh, they go confession on Saturday and they party up on Friday. And so once they go to confession, then it's like their sins are wiped away. And it's like, well, how's that any different than okay, once you get saved and you're baptized and you're washed in the blood of Christ. And you never have to say anything ever again.
I was so surprised the first time I heard that. I mean, not too long ago as an adult, with children and stuff. And somebody explained to me that when you're baptized in a lot of these fundamentalist churches, you accept verbally, Jesus Christ is my Lord and personal Savior, and they dunk you in water, and then you got a free get out of hell card. I just That astounded me. I had no idea. The Catholic Church, I know, requires a lot more accountability. Now, everybody's human, and there are a lot of really bad things going on all over the place in all faiths, but theoretically, that's how it's supposed to work.
Right.
And the first fundamentalists that I really knew to have long conversations with were here in this little town. And the first time one of them said, "Well, Catholics aren't Christian," I laughed. I said, "What are you talking about?" And then we had the conversation, and I didn't want to hear it. But
Well, that's like, okay, Lutheran is Catholic light. If you talk to a good many real priests, they're going to say all it is Catholic light because they stepped away from the main teachings
yeah,
that they had issues with.
the Protestant Reformation, they were protesting things they didn't like. They wanted to reform it. What was it? The Catholic Church they belonged to. And so it was a schism. They broke away. Henry VIII was a Catholic and broke away because he wanted to marry his girlfriend, and he couldn't get the church to go along with the divorce thing, and my sister-in-law and my brother and all that stuff. So he made his own church because then he could give himself permission, and that's the Church of England. That's where the Church of England comes from. Uh, I think that would be like Anglican Episcopalian, I think.
Anglican.
Yeah. Lutheran, Martin Luther, just didn't like the corruption that he saw in the Catholic Church that he belonged to, and and resisted it, protested it.
And taught how you're usually taught, you can't change from inside. So you have to step outside to become the change,
Right. Right.
which all this conversation that we've just had sort of comes back to the whole chapter about you had the people before Adam and Eve, you had the people that saying by Jewish law that the flood in Noah was in 1654. I take it that it's a Jewish year because it says by Mosaic law. But,
Oh, I didn't even
that's
think
like,
about that.
but that's, 4,000 years our time in the past. But he goes, that's not, you know, not he, but they
That's
say
just the
that's
tip
not
of
how
the
it,
iceberg, basically
yeah.
going into the past. Yeah, yeah.
So
Which, of
you,
course, yeah,
so you have another round that says, okay, you have to step outside of the box
yeah,
of what you were taught so you can start getting introduced to new ideas
yeah.
and take it further.
And so much of religion previous to the founding of uh, the early Christian church, the Roman Catholic Church, um, not counting the Jews and the Muslims, they hadn't been invented yet. Uh, the Jews were an older religion; they came first, right? But if you go back and back and back into the shadows of past time, people professed beliefs that really echoed, or getting the timeline right, Jesus actually echoed many of the old beliefs of the past. And I don't know, I think it was not enough control for the first institutional Catholic Church. So they wanted to get rid of things that would put any kind of free will or a boundary between their control of the people and the people. So, for example, we don't want you to believe in reincarnation, because if you believe in reincarnation, you're not going to come to us for forgiveness. We can't hold hellfire over your head, because you'll have this notion that you'll be able to do it again. You'll be able to come back and fix things. Not enough control. So it's interesting how all of it evolved. And if you take a step back and don't emotionally connect to too much of the rules and regulations, the bureaucracy and stuff, you find that there's this intersection where they all kind of come together and they all kind of agree about some very essential things. And we're going to get to that, because I think that's going to be in here. I have the feeling, right?
Mhm.
So we're just
But
starting out.
but as an to further that line of thinking, you had to the what the first the Nicene Convention or however they
Oh, the
put it,
Nicene Council was in
council
the
that's was about 300 and
350,
something.
yeah,
They
it's in
had
the
to
fourth
wait
century.
almost 3 generations away from Christ before they could start setting what they said, this is what everybody truly meant. Because
Yeah,
even the disciples between the East and the West were in disagreement with
yeah.
things, and they felt that they were teaching exactly by the word of Christ.
Yeah, you had these little isolated communities all over the Middle East and into the East, and down into Northern Africa, all over the place, that were, well, arguing with each other, didn't agree with each other. Well, St. Paul told us this, and St. John told us this, right? And so the Nicene Council was a way of establishing a hierarchy and a structure, an institutional structure to the whole thing, and putting people in charge, right? And it was done under the auspices, really, of the Roman Empire. It was still grasping for control, hence the Roman
Right,
Catholic
but
Church, right?
then they took they are the ones that also came in and destroyed a lot of those philosophical manuscript
The esoteric ones,
that
like the
that
Essenes. Yeah.
well, but going all the way back to Plato and Socrates and all the way back, they destroyed that because they felt that was violating their realm. And it wasn't until writings were showing up from the Muslims were coming back from the Eastern who had copies of Greek manuscripts that had,
Yeah.
and then you've got stuff coming out of North Africa that predate all that, and the true Hebrewic manuscripts that can be traced back to what we lost during the burning of the first temple.
It's kind of, I did that book by, is it Elaine Pagel? I think her name is. It was her dissertation, her PhD. She did the book The Gnostic Gospels about Mag Haravi, I think is how you say it.
Mhm.
Yeah. The amphora, that, the clay jars with the rescued old scriptures in them. And I think it's interesting when you go through them. She makes a big point of showing the struggle for control. This is what these older texts say, and this is how 400 years later they were twisting it and destroying what didn't agree with their version. And she does talk a little bit about translations. Paul Wallace, is a linguist, and he actually, in his books, he will take a word and he'll bring it right down to its original meaning. This is what it looked like in cuneiform, and this is what they meant by that. And shows how the meaning might change or how it's been intentionally misrepresented. And it completely shifts the meaning of the larger writing and therefore the teaching. And it's really important that each of us takes a step back and learns all this stuff for ourselves rather than be spoon fed it by people with an agenda. And a lot of people don't have time to do that. That's where you and I come in. We do the
Well,
reading,
and that
so you don't have to, right?
and that's, because I know that I talk about it as if it's gospel. Pardon the pun on words, but it's what I know and I have seen work,
Mhm.
So I don't have all the answers, but I have truly seen it at work in life. So there has to be something to it.
And,
Because
very much like a contestant on The Bachelor, I'm on a journey and I'm just trying to figure things out. And so I'm attempting to remain open minded and see what other people have done the hard work and have written about it, and try to learn what I can from people smarter than I from the past. And I really like what I know about Kardec, and I understand what he's doing here. I'm eager to move forward in his work and get into a little more nuanced stuff,
yes,
which
because
we
the
will.
medium book is so much better.
Well, but
That's the second book,
you need a
but
foundation. You need
but
to know,
yeah,
yeah.
but as a medium, that's that makes a lot more sense.
Oh, and that's what
Yeah.
people are really interested in. Philosophy is kind of a slog. And I can understand where people would be, oh my God, you're making my eyes cross. So I hope we can keep it somewhat
But the spirits book,
digestible.
once we get past the next truly 3 books of the first section of the spirits book, it's gonna
And that's
eh,
not too many chapters. Yeah.
no,
Yeah. Yeah.
no, it opens up a whole new world.
Well, we're
But,
good, conscientious students, and we're not going to skip. We're going to do our homework, and we'll
and,
be prepared.
like, as a quick example out of all this, my grandmother was dying in the hospital for a month in August 1978. And that was the first time that I had to go through a close relative dying.
Yeah.
We never talked about it. We didn't discuss it. You didn't say things about it because it upset everybody, you know. And so one evening I was sitting there, I was crying and all this because she's dying. And this older lady, Sweetwater, Texas, okay? There's a Baptist church on every corner. I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm not saying it's right. But she hands me a handkerchief, embroidered, so it's a decent handkerchief to start with, you know. And it's like, "Here, dry your eyes, you keep the handkerchief, all this." And she goes, "If you pray hard enough, your grandmother will get better."
Oh God, putting all the onus on you, and you were a kid, huh?
You know? And so then my grandmother dies. And for years, it's like, what did I do wrong? How
Right.
did I not do something right enough to God that he let my grandmother die? You know? And so I carried that around forever.
Yes,
And
child
then,
wounds. You know that.
you know, and I, by that time, I had already had run-ins with Sunday school teachers and stuff because I asked questions. And, you know, I was happy sitting there learning my ESP at 8 and 9 years old and pyramid power and all this. 70s was a great lifetime. So, you know, I would ask questions, and I had this Sunday school teacher say, "Sit down and shut up. Do not ask another question, and whatever I tell you, you take as gospel." So, after that, Sunday school was over and we got home, told my mother I never want to go back to church. Didn't know why. I didn't understand you know,
You couldn't
what
have verbalized it, but in your heart, you knew that you were being squashed.
well, and then I would also say that my people in my spiritual frame were they were not having that. "Oh, no, you have done crossed that line." Because back then, I was what I term very lit. I heard my name called all the time. I had prophetic dreams. You know, I would be in the hall going, "What do y'all want?" And my mom and dad are saying, "Who are you talking to?" It's like, "You called me 3 times."
Well, I was going to ask you, you didn't tell people this, did you?
My mom and dad, I did.
Oh, I'm surprised they didn't have you exorcised.
No, they were Baptist, please.
You don't do it. They don't have any kind of an exorcism type
Oh,
thing.
no. You just didn't pray hard enough or you need to be baptized. Because I told you the story about, you know, watching
Yeah.
that movie to make you become saved,
Yeah.
you know. But years later, and I told you this about when my dad was having his open heart surgery, I'm sitting there knitting in the waiting room with my mom and other family members. And my mother has, as I put it, she had vapors because she was emotionally distraught.
Yeah.
Okay.
Shouldn't laugh.
And I looked at her and I'm knitting and I said, "That was the mantle you chose to pick up years ago. And you have yet to put it down and let someone else take up." So, you know, and
And
then,
she looked at you like you had three heads.
well, and that and her cousins looked at me like I was possessed,
Yeah.
you know,
Well, maybe you were. I don't
and,
know.
um 3 days later, after my dad is woken up and all this, where I'm there at the spending with him at the hospital at night, you know, and he was bickering with my mom, and she's getting all upset, going, "I don't understand why he's bickering at me." And I didn't understand it, but I had looked at her and I said, "Because he's crossed the other side. He is holding on to this side by his fingernails.
Yeah,
And
he's
so
done
he's
with
fighting
this.
with you because you're his anchor on this side."
Yeah.
Because a few weeks later, he was in a rehab place, and I asked him how he was feeling, and he's telling me what hurts, what doesn't hurt. And it's like, no, 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 not what you're feeling. How do you feel? And then he starts crying and going, I don't understand why they brought me back. I was at peace on the other side,
Oh man.
and he had questions. And I felt that I wasn't the one to try to explain things because I haven't been through it. And I said, I'll get you a priest. They know, they have talked with patients, you know, going through heart surgery and stuff like that because all the heart patients all have similar stories. They have the same experiences,
Hmm. Hmm.
and so because of Kardec and spiritism and stuff, the water is very important for spirits to work. Well, when he starts crying, my first thought is that is his spirit coming forward, and everybody's, around going, this is what he's feeling. This is why he feels lost. He doesn't understand, you know. And so then I tried to help the best I could. Same when he was dying. That Sunday, he looks at me and he was already having troubles. Like the words weren't right, his thoughts weren't right, and all that. But he looks at me and says, I'm scared. What do I do? And I could only take it from the point of I this go around, I haven't died, so I can't give you verbatim firsthand knowledge. But what I'm told is don't fight, let it come naturally, and you will not be by yourself when you cross. There will be people reaching and coming forward to you that my mom, your parents, whoever else feels that they need to be there to help you cross so that you're not alone. You
Did
know,
that comfort him?
I take it did. He had a lot of problems the last few days before he passed because we had to put him actually in the hospice place because couldn't handle it all here. He was in too much pain, and what they could give you at home wasn't enough,
Yeah, yeah,
you know.
yeah.
And he fought it for 3 days. But my brother would go up there and sit with him and stuff. And he said every time I sit there and start talking to him, he would fight. They said that when I wasn't there, he was much more at ease. So he
Hmm.
was still trying to fight,
Fight for
not to give up,
yeah,
you know. And it's
yeah.
like, so I did what I could do to comfort him. And I took it from the point of being a medium. This is what I know. This is what they tell me. This is what you're going to see. And I don't want to die. I'll be honest. I, months ago, I could have gotten into really bad shape because of a leg infection that I could have easily went downhill quick. I told my doctor, I'm not ready to die. First of all, I got to finish my degree. But, I'm not afraid of dying because I've been on the edge too many times.
Well, you know
I
what?
spoke to them, and I was leaving work to drive myself to the emergency room, and I told the dead people, "You better be there when I cross over and don't leave me hanging." And after that, it was done.
I hate to quote this person, but I find this enormously funny. You know what Woody Allen said?
What?
He says, I'm not afraid to die. I just don't want to be there when it happens. You have to admit that's pretty good. I think we should
Mhm.
we should end on that light note.
Yes, that's what I was trying to bring it around
Yeah,
because
I
it
think
all fit in what we talked about.
we did a good job. I think this is hard stuff to talk about because let's face it, none of us knows what we're talking about. It's speculation for everybody until you're dead. So this is a good mental exercise, and I'm thank you very much for coming along for the little journey. I hate
Thank
to
you
use
for
that word
having
too.
me.
Oh, it's been fun. We'll do it again.
Yeah,
We'll be on our next chapter, and I hope people are interested in this. Let us know if we're
yeah,
just chatting between ourselves. Maybe we need to reconsider. But I'm hoping that people are interested,
yeah.
and it does lead into a vast discussion of mediumship. So if you can hang on through the beginning dry introductory stuff, we're going to get to some great stuff very, very soon. So thanks everybody for watching. Thank you, Tim, for being my partner in crime here, and we'll be back when we get back. In the meantime, slung foil and slancha.
Bye.